Presented by Yahoo Daily Fantasy Sports, the only place where you can become a baller. Yeah, I'm looking at you. Get your you like that? I know Josh like that. Well, here's the great thing. You can get $30 in Yahoo Sports rewards points simply by signing up with us at awesomemode.com. Go to awesomemode.com. Click on the NFL tab and articles. You will see the showdown article from yesterday. It's an NFL article. It's entirely free. But because we can't throw the link actually to Yahoo Daily Fantasy Sports and YouTube chat, here's our workaround so we can get you your YSRPs. Also, our phenomenal social media boys are going to throw that link into the YouTube chat too. That'll take you right to that article. Remember, you get $30 in Yahoo Sports rewards points when you sign up and deposit through us. Use the sign-up code AWESEMO, AWESEMO, and get in on some of these great contests that they've got going, especially for Thanksgiving. Dude, you and I talked about the turkey trot yesterday. So I did the turkey trot was a $75,000 Thanksgiving Day NFL contest with $25,000 in overlay. So I go on 11 a.m. show with Sal Vetri, the NFL strategy show this morning. And I'm looking for it, like trying to talk about it during the read. It was gone. Filled up Tuesday morning for a Thursday slate.
All right. Well, I missed that one.
Yeah, I was so pissed off, dude. I was really not happy about that. But they still got I know they are listening to me because you know what this one's called? It's not the Turkey Trot 2. It's the Turkey Baller. So yeah. And by the way, Josh had a phenomenal line yesterday. He DM'd me when I said only you can become a baller. He said, where only you can become a turkey. So,
I think that was on the show with me this morning, actually.
Did he say it?
Yeah.
Oh, beautiful. I told him you got to actually use that.
Yep. Yeah, he said it on the show this morning.
Good. Were you impressed?
It's too early for that shit, man.
All right. Use the sign-up code AWESEMO. Sign up through us at the NFL article link and get your $30 in YSRPs. Get in that Thanksgiving action. 2 games today, dude. Couple days away from Thanksgiving. We're going to have a great show tomorrow. We're also going to have, I want you guys to know, a lot of people travel. They might leave Wednesday. They might leave Thursday morning. They don't have time to do stuff. For the Thanksgiving NFL slate, Chris Baggs, myself, and Alex Baker, Awesemo himself, tomorrow afternoon, maybe early afternoon, maybe late morning. We still haven't decided on the time. We are going to do a deeper dive format for the Thanksgiving 3-game slate. So we're not going to do the NFL strategy show. We're going to go with the deeper dive format and make it happen. Did you get your haircut today?
I got my haircut a week ago. Just haven't stopped wearing hats in the meantime.
Oh, I got mine cut today, but I was super late coming home. So I said, I'll throw a ball cap on and we'll get rocking. What do you think?
You also did just, what did you say?
No, go ahead. What were you going to say?
Oh, I'll say you scared me because I wasn't really listening to you. And I came back to deeper dive format for the 3-game NFL slate. And for a second, I thought I was included. And I was really concerned.
You're good, bro. What do you think about this one? Same question as always. Initial thoughts, 2-gamer, 2 games above 227 over-unders too.
Yeah, I mean, for a 2-game slate, it's not bad. It's kind of like the one that we had before. I don't remember anymore who was on it. But if you're going to have 2 games, it's at least 2 decent games. Dallas and the Clippers should be a good game. 2-point spread there, 228 total. 2 good teams. Obviously, I think you agree, but expect the Clippers to be like the best team this year. And then with the Wizards and Denver clearly the better team in Denver, 11-point spread, but the Wizards have been the second most efficient offense this year, the second least efficient defense. It should at least be a fun game for the Nuggets. So definitely not bad from a DFS standpoint if you're only going to have 2 games.
Okay, let's jump into it. As always, we're happy to have all of you guys with us, even on a 2-gamer. Man, we're keeping the chat popping. We're keeping things alive here on the deeper dive. Like I say all the time, we got the best viewers, and you got the best subs, we got the best everything in the business. And we enjoy spending the night with you. So, number 1, remember that tweet I sent out the other day? You had a pretty good joke about the individual offensive efficiency for the Dallas Mavericks this year. Tell me that's not insane, though. Obviously they lead the league as a team in offensive rating, but of anyone playing 20 minutes or more per game this year, the top 4 in offensive efficiency are all on the Dallas Mavericks.
Yeah, I mentioned your tweet this morning because Josh referenced how good the new Maverick starting lineup has been together with Hardaway in there over Curry or Wright or whoever else has been starting at times this year, that I don't remember the number now, but their offensive efficiency is just insane. Their net rating is insane. And I mentioned that you had tweeted that Dwight Powell is the number 1 offensive player in basketball. DFS is 3 and Hardaway is 4.
It's nuts. It's nuts. Yeah. And you had made the joke when I said the Luka Doncic effect is outrageous. You said something to the extent of, or he's just being carried by Dwight Powell, Dorian Finney-Smith,
right,
and Tim Hardaway.
Which I think I would look good at basketball too if I was playing with the number 1, 3, and 4 offensive players in the league.
Yeah. And it's not just that though. When you look at their team offensive efficiency, it's not the end all be all stat, but they're 117.4. The Wizards are second at 113.6. That's the crazy separation there.
Yeah, it is. Sorry, I was muted because someone was hitting the buzzer to my apartment for some
You're good.
reason.
I did hear that. But yeah, just the separation there, 4 points is nuts.
Yeah, it is.
All right. Why don't we dive into this one? Dallas, LA Clippers. We're going to do everything we can to cover every part of every game. And by that, I mean every part of 2 games. This one, 227 over under, 114.3 implied total for the Clippers, 112.8 for the Dallas Mavericks, who are 1-point favorites. Clippers opened at 1.5-point favorites, Adam. You've now got the Mavs as 1-point favorites. I don't care if this is in Dallas. If I told you, the Dallas Mavericks, a month plus into the season, are going to be favored at home, albeit only 1 point, favored at home against Paul George, Kawhi Leonard, Lou Williams, Montrezl Harrell, Patrick Beverley, you'd have laughed and maybe even spit in my face.
Yeah, I'm still seeing the Clippers as 1.5-point favorites.
Okay, I'm not. You know what? I'm sorry. I was looking at differential. My fault. But even 1.5-point dogs is insane against this team.
Yeah.
But yeah, you're right.
No, I actually saw a stat on ESPN earlier too, and it was just the point of their graphic was how much quote unquote better the Clippers have been at home than on the road this year. But the thing that stood out to me was the Clippers have played 16 games this year, and 4 have been on the road, and 12 have been at home. But yeah, it is I guess smaller spread than you would have guessed coming into the season.
Looking at the Dallas Mavericks first. Well, Luka Doncic stands out a little bit. Price point is, I wouldn't even use the word egregious. It's finally appropriate. 11.4 on DraftKings, 12.5 on FanDuel. He's the most expensive player by $1,800. Over here on our sponsor, Yahoo, you've got Luka weighing in at $54. He's more expensive than Kawhi Leonard, the next highest priced player, by $7. So if you're playing Doncic, you're paying a premium for him. I mentioned in the deep dive today, he was a plug and play no matter the slate when he was at 98 or 10.3 or 10 or even 10.6. He's at 11.4 now on a 2-game slate. Of course, you played Luka Doncic, but now we're at least going forward. We're going to be having conversations about like, hey, do we play Doncic at 12.5? It's at least a conversation to be had now, depending on the matchup.
Yeah, it's at least not the plug and play when he was like 9,600, averaging 1.8 points per minute.
Exactly.
But yeah, I mean, that being said, still getting to basically all the Luka tonight. We just got an ownership update, and I haven't been able to work it into my spreadsheet yet. But with our prior ownership, if I were in 150 lineups on DraftKings, I was getting 98% Luka. It obviously it's not like it's a great matchup. The Clippers have multiple very, very good individual defenders. They should be a great defensive team overall, but playing 35, 36 minutes with Porzingis on the floor this year, he has a 36.4% usage rate, 46.8% assist percentage. He's averaged over 1.8 fantasy points per minute overall this season. So all that stuff still comes into play. And then on DraftKings, specifically, you just have so many cheap values where even if they're not necessarily individually, there's a lot of guys where you're not really confident, but as a group, if you take like a bucket of those guys and rotate them through lineups, there's going to be at least a couple of them that have good games. And so it makes it relatively easy to get Luka in.
Yeah, it does. Value is not great, but on a site like this, you're going to have something. And it doesn't need to be great. Like it doesn't need to be elite, 10, 11 game slate type value here. And we'll get to a few of those plays momentarily. Kristaps Porzingis is $6,900 on DraftKings. That, my friend, is pretty absurd. He he's definitely hit some bumps in the road when you're looking at how this season has gone returning from the ACL. Totally understand that. But he's still averaging 1.25 fan at DraftKings points per minute. He still has a 26% usage rate, 15.6% rebound rate. And I think I've mentioned to you in the past that while his rebounding rate isn't elite for someone that's 9 feet tall, he's blocking shots at almost a 6% clip, which, when you're racking up those type of block shot numbers each night, 3-4 blocks you see on many occasions, 6 and a 5 spot he's dropped this season. That really does add to his upside.
Yeah, and his rebounding numbers have come up as well as the season's gone on. He's rebounding better with Luka on the floor this year. He has a 14% rebounding percentage, which is obviously appealing. Playing 33, 34 minutes in competitive games. He's projected to be the second highest owned player tonight on DraftKings, and at 6,900, I don't disagree with that at all. He was my second highest owned player as well. On FanDuel, he's a little bit more expensive, but still, I think a good play there too.
Any other thought? I mean, we got to fill up an hour here. So, does the matchup concern you at all, or is the price point on draft? I mean, for me, the price point's just silly low, so it doesn't really matter. But does the matchup do enough for you to say, hey, FanDuel 8,500, a little bit difficult? And then the problem too is you look at the power forward slate, and I like Millsap a lot. We'll get to him. Kawhi Leonard's 10-2 though. Porzingis is 8-5. But once you get down there, unless you like Maxi Kleber, we'll talk about him. And really, that's it. It is a shallow position on this 2-gamer.
Right. I mean, it's the matchup obviously could be better. Like he's going to be dealing with George or Leonard or whoever. But there's only so many options. And even on FanDuel at 8,500, if I just run like my top 10 optimal lineups, he's in 9 of them because there's just not that many other options at the position. Kawhi Leonard being a power forward, does give you at least some high upside alternative there, but it's still not a great position. And I think that 33 or 34 minutes of Porzingis, who alongside Luka this year has about a 25% usage rate, has that 14% rebounding percentage, is still a really strong option, even though it's a tough defensive matchup.
Okay. The rest of this team, I mean, it's filled with the best offensive rated players in the league. So here you have it. What about guys like DFS? And I'm just going to throw everybody out there because we need to get through them. DeLon Wright. We saw the rotation change up a little bit last time, and we saw Tim Hardaway go from playing 18, 20, 19, 15 to 38 minutes. And I'm going to give you some time to break this down. It wasn't just Tim Hardaway. The lineup, the rotation looked different than it has quite a bit in a number of spots last time out. Same thing with Washington too. We'll get to that, but let's start with Dallas.
Yeah, the rotation for Dallas was really different. Josh and I talked about it this morning that if you actually go through and look at, so 10 guys played total, but if you go through and actually look at the guys that were like intended to play, there was only really 8 guys. Jalen Brunson played 2 minutes and then he never came back. Justin Jackson played about 8 first half minutes, but Maxi Kleber picked up 2 fouls within 2 minutes of subbing in. So Dwight Powell came back in early, picked up his second foul and subbed out. That's when Justin Jackson came in. In the second half, where they were on their normal rotation, Justin Jackson didn't play at all, and Maxi played alongside Powell for a stretch while Porzingis was on the bench. So I wasn't confident enough to like actually project an 8-man rotation here. I still gave about 10 minutes to Justin Jackson. But in addition to Hardaway joining the starting lineup, you had what had been Jalen Brunson's role basically as the backup to Luka be taken over by Seth Curry, but you didn't get many minutes of Seth alongside Luka. He played about 1 minute with Luka on the floor. So I think that based on that last game, at least, Seth's basically the backup point guard and not much else. Luka gets his, Porzingis gets his. Tim Hardaway played 38 minutes and lost the final minute and 48 seconds to a blowout.
Yeah,
I have him at 34 minutes tonight. Obviously, that could be wrong. It probably to some extent depends on how he's playing. We know that Carlisle's not afraid to sub guys in and out when it comes to DeLon Wright and Hardaway and Curry. But that's, where I'm at on him. And then I have DeLon Wright playing about 24 minutes off the bench. So looking at the rotation, at least against Houston, it was a much tighter rotation than we've had in most games for Dallas this year.
Yeah, no question. And I spent a lot of time trying to break this one down. When you look at it too, there's also the matter of we only have 2 games on this slate, Adam. Like there's 2 games. So we need to get something like this right. And it's not like we're going to get into Rick Carlisle's head, but I think we definitely have to do everything we can to get these minutes right. So we know Luka, Porzingis are getting the minutes, and you said you have Hardaway right now at 34, right?
Yep.
Okay, so with 34 minutes projected for Tim Hardaway, 5K on DraftKings, on FanDuel, Hardaway coming in at 5,400. Yahoo, you've got Hardaway at $14 with those projected minutes. And look, you could be wrong. I could be wrong. I there's really no way to tell because we've only seen this once. But assuming you're right, how much are you going to have of Hardaway tonight?
So before the most recent ownership update, where on DraftKings he went from 7% to 18%. I was getting him as my third highest owned player, around 70%. I still think I'll be way over the 18% mark. He probably will come down a little bit just because he's projected for a little bit higher ownership, and that's how my stuff works. But I expect Hardaway to be one of my bigger stands tonight, just because he's not really expensive. He's 5K on DraftKings. He's, I think, 5,400 on FanDuel, and I'm not getting to nearly as much on FanDuel. Out of my top 10 lineups on FanDuel, he's only in 2 of them, whereas on DraftKings, he's in most of them. So I think just a better DraftKings play than FanDuel play. But if he's going to get minutes, he has a 20% usage rate with Porzingis and Luka on the floor this year. He's averaged 1.06 fantasy points per minute, but that's on the back of about a 65% effective field goal percentage, which is very, very much unsustainable for Tim Hardaway Jr. But even, if you're getting 34 minutes at 0.8 points per minute, he's a really good play at 5K.
Okay. Laffy looks like the leader of an alt-right group. Laffy looks like an Uber Eats driver. That's a good one. Laffy looks identical to Luka. Luka looks identical to Laffy.
Laffy looks identical to Davis Bertans.
No, we don't look anything alike, dude. He's a goofy looking fella. We will talk about him, though. Do you want to talk about anything else for Dallas first?
Yes. So Maxey and Dwight Powell, I think, they're both going to be popular tonight.
Oh, yeah. Dwight Powell's just been spectacular, man. I can't get over how good of a season he's having.
Number 1 offensive player in basketball.
0.49 fantasy points per minute over his last 5.
Yeah. Last year, he averaged 1 fantasy point per minute. This year, he is not.
Or half of that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's been bad. So I think that in our most recent ownership update on DraftKings, one thing that I did note was that Maxey's projected ownership came up, and now he's basically about the same as Dwight Powell, which I think is how it should be. Kleber's a little bit more productive from a per minute standpoint for DFS. Powell presumably will start and maybe gets a couple more minutes potentially. That's not even a lock, but I was going to say whichever one's lower owned is the one that I would rather have. Like, basically what happened when I made my lineups earlier was I got a similar amount of combined ownership between Powell and Maxey, but it was just I went underweight on the popular one and overweight on the lower one. Now, if they're going to be projected for about the same ownership, I think that coming in right around the field is fine, because I don't think that there's any reason to have to feel good about like a huge stand on one over the other. They probably play comparable minutes. We did see 7 minutes alongside each other in the second half last game against Houston as well, which I think was good to see. But, neither is an ultra productive player when they're out there with Porzingis and Luka. It's more of just because they are very, very comparable projected players. If their ownership is different, then you can kind of just leverage against the field there.
Dude, Dwight Powell recently has just been so bad. Like, it's crazy to me that he's played 24 plus minutes in 4 straight games. He's attempted, in his last 5 games, he's attempted 12 field goals total. Like, how does that even happen?
He has the lowest usage rate on the team, and he backs that up while playing center with an 8% rebounding percentage.
I know. That's what's crazy. You would think that you're getting 25 minutes a night, that you'd at least have some putback opportunities, right? Or a couple chances in the pick and roll, something. But
you would think that if you're like 6'10", I don't know exactly how tall he is, but I think it's around there, and you were on the floor for 25 minutes in an NBA game, you would have to try to rebound as the
You're right. It's
like
crazy.
Like the other team shoots and you just like start out on a fast break, like cherry picking or something.
Yeah, you have to be Marcus Chris is what you're saying. Yeah, I say it because that guy can't box anyone out for shit. But yeah, look, I don't know, man. I don't know. I guess you gotta have. Who do you like better, him or Maxi?
Whichever is lower owned.
All right, that's
I mean,
really all
like,
it comes.
yeah, like that's not even a cop out. I have, like, for example, on FanDuel, I have Dwight Powell at 20.6 points, and I have Maxey at 20.4.
Okay, so the Clippers side of the ball, it's pretty amazing when you look at how usage is being distributed since Paul George got healthy and the 3 games that they've played together. It's pretty wild, man. So the usage rates when Leonard, Williams, and George are on the court together are 33% for Leonard, 31 for Williams, and 28% for George. We don't have a ton of minutes there, but we're taking what we get. Other than Montrezl Harrell's at 23, no one else has a usage rate above 17%. And there's no reason to think that that changes anytime soon. And when you look at some of the playing time, like Lou Williams is playing so far, he's played about 27%, 28% of his minutes without both of those guys on the floor. So I don't want to look at certain guys and say, well, this team's healthy now. Everyone's here. You can't play Williams anymore. You can't play him. You can't play him. If the price is right on certain guys, I have no problem getting there.
No, and I think that's a really important point too. If you go back and look, I think I know I did. I think you did too. But we expected that George and Kawhi would be pretty heavily staggered, and that so basically Lou would be playing alongside one of them all the time, and we know that his production would go down. But that hasn't been the case. Like if you go back and look at the game that the Clippers played against the Pelicans, Leonard and George really weren't staggered all that much. Like most of their minutes were alongside each other. And so that means that you still have the Lou Will and Harrell pick and roll with the second unit, which is obviously beneficial for both of those guys. And assuming it continues, it makes it so it's kind of like you got a preemptive price discount on Lou Will going down
For
to
sure, yeah.
6,300 and Harrell going down to 6,700 when they shouldn't be as expensive as they were, like, obviously when Kawhi was out or something, but they're not, at least with the current rotations, they're not being hurt as much as I think it was anticipated.
I don't think so either. And one of the reasons is everyone else just takes the brunt of it.
Right.
Like everyone else is just seeing their, but the thing is, it's not like anyone else was really sporting a mega high usage rate anyway. Kicks Good says PG no top play with Kawhi not resting. Well, it's a 2-game slate and you have to look at price points here. And if you've got, so let's do this. Look at it on each site. Both Paul George is small forward, power forward on DraftKings, 8,200. Kawhi is shooting guard, small forward at 8,800. So $600 discount. Kawhi's 10-2 and power forward on FanDuel. Paul George, power small forward, 9,500. And then on Yahoo, Kawhi Leonard, small forward, 4,700. Paul George, power forward, 4,400. So by site, how are you working these guys into lineups today?
I prefer Kawhi regardless. I have Kawhi at 32 minutes. I have George at 34, but we have seen the higher usage rate for Kawhi through those first couple of games. We've seen Kawhi second on the team in potential assists with 9.5 per game. He's been he's been getting more opportunities than George. So I am giving a slight edge to Kawhi. I think that they're both good plays, but I like Kawhi a little bit more. I will also say that I don't think either one is a priority in terms of like highest owned guy on the slate for me. Like, for example, on DraftKings, I had around 35% of Kawhi in the crunch I did before the show. I had like 22% of George. On FanDuel, if I just look at my top lineups, I have Kawhi in one of them. I have George in none of them. So yeah, I think that they're good plays, especially on DraftKings where they're cheap. But like I would prioritize Luka. I would prioritize on DraftKings, or I guess on either site, Porzingis. There's guys that I would take over Kawhi or George.
Talk to me a little bit more about Lou Williams here. DraftKings price point is $6,300. That I would say that's pretty interesting, at least.
Yeah, it's a pretty nice price tag. I still didn't get to a ton. I think just because of how much Luka I have, and then the fact that I'm prioritizing Porzingis as well. But I got to more Zubats, I got to more Harrell, I got to more Kawhi. But I do think it's a really fair price tag. The minutes are I guess a little bit concerning. He only played 25 minutes against the Pelicans, but that was a game where he missed out on closing. So I think you could at least give him another few minutes. I have him at 30 here. I think that 28 to 30 is probably where he comes in most of the time. So I think that he's fine. But again, I would put him behind Kawhi. I have him behind George. I have him behind Zubac and Harrell as well.
You're only giving Lou 28, 30 minutes, you said?
I have him at 30.
Okay. Fair enough.
What do you have?
32.
Okay.
I think there's definitely a possibility that we see less. There's no question about that. But what's the reason? So he played 37 against Boston. All three of them played 34 against Houston. Both of those games were decided by 3 points. And then he played 25 minutes against New Orleans. Now, something I've always talked about. I always hear people saying, well, yeah, blowout run for a guy like Lou Williams. Well, 6 men type of guys are actually hurt more by blowouts than the starters, because they come off the bench late. Sometimes they don't even come off the bench in the second half. Now, that wouldn't be the case with Lou, but when you look at his second half rotation, he played, I think he played about 12 minutes there. And then the final, 8 minutes of that game, he was on the bench. And then in the first half, he played, let's see, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. But I'm assuming that he closes that game out for sure if it's competitive.
So the Rockets, the Rockets game, he played, 33 and a half minutes, but he played the final 20 plus minutes of that game. That's obviously not a normal rotation. I don't really know exactly what happened, why he played so much, but I'm not projecting that. He played like 12 first half minutes and then played 20 minutes in the second half. Against the Pels, he played 12 first half minutes. He got to 25 minutes. If you assume that he was going to sub out and then sub back in, a few minutes later and pick up another 4 to 5 minutes to close that game out, that would put him at about 30.
What about the Boston game?
3 games ago?
3 games ago. Kawhi and George both played, and Lou Will played 37 minutes.
Overtime.
Was it okay? So he played 32 minutes in regulation.
Yeah. He had another one where he played 18 straight in the second half. So I guess he could.
Yeah, I personally think he's going to run heavy minutes in the second half. Give him a little bit less in the first half, and then probably I would not be surprised if he plays 18, 19 minutes in the second half. So you might be spot on here. I think he could get up to 32 minutes, but I guess we'll have to find out. If that's the case, I think he's an interesting play at a discounted price point. Now, the rest of this team, Montrezl Harrell, Patrick Beverley, talk to me about these guys.
Harrell, I think, is interesting just because his ownership is lower than some other similarly priced guys. On DraftKings, for example, Harrell's 6,700 and Thomas Bryant is 5,800. So not the same price, but same positions and, comparable price point. Bryant, 40%, Harrell, 22%. I think they have basically the same range of outcomes when factoring in their salary. That is to say, I think that when you consider the goal score for Harrell at 6,700 and for Bryant at 5,800, they hit it about the same percentage of the time. So I don't think that Harrell should be half the ownership of Thomas Bryant. I don't think that he should be lower owned than, or much lower owned than guys like Will Barton either. So I think that he's someone where I like to be overweight on, maybe at the expense of some of my Thomas Bryant exposure. So kind of using that as a pivot. I think that this is a game where Zubac could play 20 minutes, which obviously isn't great for Harrell if he's likely to get 28 or 29 instead of 32. But still playing minutes just with Lou Williams without George or Leonard, I think is important. And it's not like it's a bad matchup for the Clippers. So with his ownership where it is right now, I think Harrell's a good tournament play.
How much Luka right now do you have on DraftKings?
98%.
So the same conversation is going on in our YouTube chat as we saw with Giannis. You would, not being a dick here, but you'd think people would learn to some extent. I think it's a little bit different today. I do, because on last night, Giannis was the only top tier guy. But how many people did we have in chat? Oh, well, I'm not going to play Giannis. You don't, with Giannis, you didn't even need a monster game from him. But if he had 55 or 60 and you didn't have him, you were cooked. He ended up going for like 80 because he's phenomenal. But there was so much discussion, Adam, like, oh, don't play Giannis. You don't need Giannis. The one guy said he was going to fade him in all 150 lineups. Now there's the same conversation about, don't play Luka. It's not necessary. I don't know, man.
I have him projected on DraftKings. I have him projected to be the highest scorer by about 16 points.
Right. And we had Giannis as the highest scorer by like 19.
Right.
So
it's so, and here's the thing, and we talked about it a little bit when we talked about Luka. It would be one thing if there was like two viable value options and they both sucked. There's like at least 10 guys on DraftKings that are less than $5,000 where even if they're not sure things like that they're going to have a good game, they at least wouldn't be surprising if they had a good game. And when there's 10 of them, there's a pretty good chance that at least a couple of those guys do, which means that there's going to be a lot of lineups that have those guys plus the highest scorer on the slate, which is most likely going to be Luka. So it's not like there's a shortage of value guys to mix in to get to Luka. So I don't really know why there would be an edge by not having the highest scoring guy on the slate.
Well, Jeremy Savage says, the Giannis slate was way different. He's the only superstar on the slate. He was the only superstar on the slate, not comparable. Shane Wentz has the right idea. Everyone thinks in a 2-gamer you need 6 times value. Matthew says it's not the same case or not the case with all the solid mid-range plays on this slate. Conscious Machine says I'm out on Luka. So there's
God, I just want to play more money.
There's a lot, man. Giannis was like 1K cheaper.
Here's the thing, though. You can't look at it and say.
Oh, here, hold on. Here's what I want. Malevolent Elephant says Giannis was like 1K cheaper than Luka is today. Luka's in a dreadful matchup. Easiest leverage you can get tonight is to fade him, and then people upvote him.
Okay, for one, Luka's projected for like 50% ownership, so you're still competing with half the field. Congratulations on competing with half the field that isn't rostering the best player on the slate, best DFS player on the slate. But also the one thing to keep in mind, because whoever made the comment about there's other superstars on the slate. Sure, Jokic, Leonard, George, Beal. In terms of NBA players, they're stars. Luka's averaging 1.8 fantasy points per minute this year. Kawhi Leonard is going to average like 1.4, maybe, alongside George. George will probably average 1.3 to 1.4. Beal's averaging 1.2. Jokic is averaging, I think, 1.3. So in terms of DFS production, it's Luka and then it's everyone else.
All right.
I do agree that the matchup sucks. Like, there's no real debating that, I don't think.
Yeah, no, I mean, the matchup is not good at all. So, all right. I mean, it's a fine conversation to have, but I think when you have such ridiculous talent in Luka, I mean, the big thing too is I get that he's very pricey, but he has a 36% usage rate, 49% assist rate, 16% rebounding rate, 7 triple doubles. He's averaging 31, 10, and 10. 31, 10, and 10, and you're going to get 35 minutes from him. So, look, you want to fade him. Look, Jokic, sure, Beal, but like $9,300 Beal in a matchup against the Denver team that is equally a terrible matchup. You know what I mean? It's not like Beal's in a good spot at all, and he's not cheap either.
Right, and so like let's take Luka, and we'll take the highest projected owned value sub 5K guy on DraftKings, which would be Gary Harris at 4,200. That is a combined $15,600. So Luka plus Gary Harris still costs you less than if you were to say, like, I want Kawhi plus George instead. You still have to fit in a third guy where, for the values to equal out. So and that goes back to my point where there are so many guys priced around Gary Harris, where even if it's not Gary Harris, it would be really surprising if there's not a couple of sub 5K guys that have big games, in which case you're not even talking about Luka being a good point per dollar play. You're saying that you need him to not be the highest scorer on the slate.
Right. So last thing, and then I'll move on. I have the best chat quote or comment of the day. You win an award, fella. $70 million man says, Mavericks 0-9 on Mondays following a Cowboys road loss. Stay away from the Mavs. Solid point, fella, except it's a Tuesday. All right.
Other than that, great stat.
I definitely would have faded if it was Monday. Denver, Washington. Who'd have thought we'd be running short on time? Let's talk about the Denver Nuggets and the Washington Wizards. 227.5 total, 119 implied for the Nuggets, 108.5 implied for Washington. Nuggets 10.5 point favorites here. Millsap's actually been really good lately. Dude's got, I think, 30 plus fantasy points in 8 straight. But more than that, his per minute production has been about 1.14 over that span. His minutes are a little bit wild, but I'd expect him to play around 30 in a competitive game. Jokic coming off a bad game, which followed up a great game with an 18, 16, 10 triple-double. And Jamal Murray in a good spot. The biggest thing here, Washington plays at a top 5 pace. They are a bottom 2 defensive team on the season. They've been miserable in that respect. But you also mentioned this team is second in the league in offensive rating. So they're double-digit dogs. Maybe it stays close, but I really love the Denver Nuggets here.
Yeah, so do I. But I also was kind of surprised that I wasn't getting more of them than I was, because it's obviously a really, really good spot going against the Wizards. Like you said, they don't play defense. They play fast. It's a huge pace-off spot for the Nuggets. But I wasn't getting a ton. Like Jokic right now is one of my biggest fades, and it's not because I dislike Jokic at all. It's just because I prefer Luka and Kawhi and George. Also, it was partly an ownership thing, which his ownership has now come down a little bit. He was like 48% earlier. Now he's 38. So maybe I start to get a little bit more. But just like compared to other top end guys, I wasn't getting a lot of him. I do have about 35 to 40% Jamal Murray. Gary Harris, I think, is a great value because he should play around 34 minutes. He's only 4,200. He gets extra possessions because of this matchup. So it's just really it's really difficult for him to fail at that price point. And obviously he can exceed it. But I was kind of surprised I wasn't getting like more of the Denver starters.
Yeah, I guess it makes sense. Well, and when it comes to Jokic, like if you have 98% Luka, then
Right.
that'll affect it for
Yeah,
sure.
and I think what it really comes down to also is like Luka's not projected for that much more ownership than Jokic, and I have it as a big
Right.
gap in projection. I like Paul Millsap at his price point, but he's projected to be the third highest owned guy on the slate. There's enough guys priced around him where, if he's projected for, let's say, 45% ownership, I can come in around half of that and then spread that ownership out to other guys that have similar ranges of outcomes and be okay.
For sure. Kent just gave us $15 in super chat. Thanks a lot, brother. He says, keep pumping out the great content, fellas. Been my best year yet since joining Awesemo. And then he says, is Adam rocking a robe right now, bro?
No, it's a pullover.
I know what it is. But that I thought you just got out of a hot bath.
I actually wear like a nice shirt on this show instead of a hoodie, and that's when my clothing choices get shown.
I get my hair cut and I'm told I look like a vagrant. I don't know what's going on, man. I look fantastic, fellas.
I have done that though.
I embrace the hate. Both of us, we embrace the hate. What's that?
I did wear like I wore a bathrobe from the W before I did a show before the Playboy Mansion one time. That was a good show.
Well, we had a bet during this show once, and you had you had to do the show naked. Now, you did not have a shirt on during the show. I don't know what was going on underneath. Neither myself or Manny asked you to prove it, but there is a show floating out there where you did it potentially nude.
Yes, there is.
Just a little bit more on Denver here. I want to talk. Well, first of all, like with guys like Millsap and Murray, where I know you said you're not getting a ton of these guys, and guys like Barton, where he's 71 or 6,100 on DraftKings, he's 67 on FanDuel. Millsap 66 on FanDuel, but particularly enticing at 54 on DraftKings. He's solidly priced on Yahoo as well. What about those mid-range guys not named Jokic? How much of them do you think you get to?
Yeah, I think so. So on Barton and Murray, I'm around the field on them, which I think makes sense. I think that they're good plays. I think that there's not a lot around them in terms of salary. Like 7,400 for Murray. There's not a ton in that price point where you're pivoting to directly. Same goes for like a $6,100 Barton. And Harris, at 4,200, I think is the best of those really cheap value plays. So I'm getting a lot of him. But it's really Jokic and Millsap, I think, that I'm coming in the most underweight on. And in Millsap's case, I'm still getting plenty of Millsap. If he's in a quarter of my lineups, that's still a lot of lineups with Millsap. It's just that relative to the field, it's a pretty aggressive fade. With Jokic, it's like a scary low amount of lineups that he's in. But I think that's just because of how much Luka I have.
So my man rolling AKG on Twitter, he's been around for a while, just tags me in something that says, confirmed, Twitter will remove inactive accounts and free up usernames in December. I've been trying to get Laffy for years. The guy that has it is some Brit that hasn't tweeted since 2012. And he would tweet like, Laffy D is tired. Laffy D just got some coffee, right? And I looked at his followers. He has 8 of them, and I think 6 of them thought they were following me. So like they follow me, or at least they did. I got to get that, man. Good looking out, RPD.
I've seen a few people pretty excited about that.
Yeah, man. Good looking out. What a guy. So what about
weirdly, there's not a lot of ship my monies out there that I'm competing with.
Yeah, especially not ship my money DFS.
Yeah.
What's up with guys like Monty Morris and Plumlee? Just let's say neither you or I predict blowouts, right? It's futile. But on a 2-game slate, are you willing to say, hey, maybe there's foul trouble or this or that, because some of these guys are decent per minute guys like Plumlee, and I could see myself getting there?
So I think that Plumlee is really interesting. I mentioned it in the NBA syllabus too. I got about 20% of him on DraftKings, which right now is slightly overweight. But I think he's a really interesting play, especially on DraftKings, because he has the power forward center eligibility. He's only 3,800. And there's a couple of ways for you to win by having him. For one, let's say he plays his normal 16 minutes. Jokic plays 32. Plumlee's averaging 1.14 points per minute this year. In this spot, I think he probably would, like, I have him projected for about 1.2 points per minute. So let's say he plays 16 minutes. He can pay off 3,800 pretty easily just by having a normal game. Then you factor in that he correlates negatively with one of the highest owned players on the slate in Jokic, in that if Plumlee gets 4 extra minutes, those minutes are coming directly from Jokic. So you're boosting yourself at the expense of a lot of people that have Jokic ahead of you. So that, works for you too. So I think Plumlee's a really good play, even just kind of on his own merits of being 3,800. I actually don't even mind having some lineups with him and Jokic, which normally I don't do. But with it being a 2-game slate, with the matchup being this favorable, it's not like it would be shocking if Jokic goes for like 55 in 28 minutes and then Plumlee plays 20.
All right. You want to talk Washington then?
So I was going to just, Monty Morris, I have like 3%, 2-game slate. I have him for 14 minutes. Jeremy Grant, kind of the same thing. I have like 10%. The Denver backups are at least guys that I think are cheap enough where if you're playing 150 lineups, you should probably be getting some exposure.
All right. Elusive Smoke made a comment that, I can't read it on the stream. So that's cool. Thanks, bro. Washington Wizards starting with Isaiah Thomas. Let's get into this, because you've got Thomas who, oh, by the way, deeper dive, one word. That'll get you 50% off your first month at awesemo.com. Go to awesemo.com/join and click begin membership. And we'll ask you a question, what type of player you are, serious, casual, professional, and then we'll cater that subscription to you. So you're getting exactly what you need, not too little, not too much. That was kind of Alex Baker, Awesemo. That was his intentions and vision when he started this site. And if you're at awesemo.com/join and you're skeptical, scroll to the bottom. You'll see tutorial videos on how to use all of our best and most popular tools. So go to awesemo.com/join. Use that sign-up code deeper dive, one word. Get 50% off your first month. All right, 50% off your first month at awesemo.com. Or you can check out a $3.95 per week express package. We got something for everyone. Or if you're feeling lucky, how about this? We're doing a Thanksgiving giveaway where you win a free Awesemo Plus yearly pass. It's $1,000 value. Guess the total points in the Cowboys and Bills Thanksgiving game. Retweet and like the retweet and follow Awesemo_com or Awesemo NFL. All you have to do is that. Register using the link below that you'll find on the tweet. $1,000 value, man, a free year of platinum Awesemo Plus membership. That's why we're thankful for you guys as viewers that help us grow this company. This is our way to give back on the holidays. Go in there and get that. Retweet, like, reply, and follow the handles. You got to follow at Ship My Money DFS and at Laffy D too. That's not true, but just do it anyway because you won't regret it, and we appreciate you. Washington, Isaiah Thomas. He is a big-time pick-and-roll guy, and Denver is really good at snuffing out ball handlers in the pick-and-roll. I was on basically the way I was to feeling today is if Isaiah Thomas was going to be very popular, I would have a lot less of him. But his ownership has actually come down each time we've updated these projections. It's a difficult matchup for sure, but he's $4,600 on DraftKings. He's $5,200 on FanDuel, and on Yahoo, Isaiah Thomas is $16. So very tough matchup. But if he plays 29 minutes at that price, he's got a 30% assist rate, 23% usage rate. There's some meat on that bone.
Yeah, there is. I'm underweight on the entire Washington team.
Really?
Yeah.
Interesting. There's a couple guys I like.
Well, so I mean, I have right now I have 40% Thomas Bryant, but that's still underweight.
Oh, well, he's easily my favorite player from this team, but right. Yeah. He's everyone's favorite player.
Right. But yeah, it's just such a brutal matchup. Like right now you have Isaiah at about 22% ownership on DraftKings. In my previous crunch, I had about 8%. Granted, that could change a little bit based on how these ownership projections changed, but it's a good salary. I have him projected for 28 minutes. But it's just such a brutal matchup. He loses out playing most of his minutes alongside Beal too. Since he joined the starting lineup, he has a 24.5% assist percentage, 19.8% usage rate. I have him projected for like 3/4 of a point per minute in this spot. So just, it's a nice salary, but there's a lot of guys at that price point that I think you can pivot to.
So you were talking about Isaiah Thomas there?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's really interesting. I'm not a DVP guy at all, but when it comes to the center position, I'm a little bit more willing to take a look because I think it's a little bit more easily explained. The Nuggets are allowing the most points and the third most rebounds or fourth most rebounds to opposing centers this season. Kind of interesting there. By the way, the Washington Wizards allowing the second most points and the most rebounds and the most assists to centers. If you put any weight in that, Nikola Jokic as a triple-double machine clearly becomes more appealing. But talk to me a little bit more about Bryant in a matchup you'd think is very difficult and probably still is, but not as bad as you might think initially.
Yeah, it's a nice price tag. He's only 5,800 power forward, center eligibility. He's playing normally around 30 minutes. He definitely runs some risk, not only because of foul trouble that he frequently gets in, but also because he does have a quality backup in Mo Wagner, who we've seen in previous games just play, he's capable of coming in and playing really well, and that limiting Bryant's minutes too. So I think that he has a kind of wide range of minute outcomes, which is one reason why I don't mind being under the field on him if he's going to be one of the most popular guys on the slate. That plus the fact that it is still a huge pace down spot for Washington against a quality defense. But I think that he's just underpriced, given his production, given his, probably 30 minutes of playing time here. So I think that he is the best play from Washington. And I think that, the field's there too.
What about the rest of this team? There's a whole lot of talk right now, amazingly, about Jordan McRae.
I have more than zero.
You have more than zero?
Yeah, I had 6.7% in the one that I did.
And that sounds about right.
Yeah, I mean, he's one of the interesting pieces of the rotation last game for Washington. And one thing to keep in mind is that just because it happened last game doesn't mean anything here.
No, Scott Brooks is an asshole.
Yeah, Scott Brooks has a lot of bench pieces that he can use however he sees fit any given night. CJ Miles played 6 minutes in that game, 5 minutes in that game, didn't play at all in the second half. Yep. You could get 18 minutes from CJ Miles tonight and nobody would, bat an eye. But they have liked Jordan McRae this year. He played 24 minutes in that game. Troy Brown only played 15. So Obviously, that's another spot where McRae could lose minutes is if Brown plays a little bit more. But they earlier in the year, they were kind of just using McRae as Bradley Beal's backup, which obviously kept his minutes in check. But now he's playing, or at least last game, he played a bunch of minutes alongside Beal. They like his scoring off the bench. He's at least someone that can get minutes if Troy Brown's not playing well. So I have him at 20 minutes tonight, and at 3,600, that's enough to get him into some lineups.
If you want to check out some free content, NBA ownership projections and NHL lineup builder are free at awesomemode.com today. You mentioned a couple of the important pieces, but I'm just going to run through this because we got a few minutes, and then we're going to turn it over to the live before lock guys, Eddie Fear, Chris Randone. They'll bring you up till 8:30. Rui played 23. Isaiah Thomas played 29. Troy Brown played 15. Thomas Bryant played 28. Beal played 41. Davis Bertans played 29. McRae played 24. Ish Smith 24. Mo Wagner played 19. And CJ Miles played 5. Bonga, Schofield, Robinson, that was like a 30 seconds at the end of the game when everything was over. So assuming that's the way it plays out today, you have 10 guys in the rotation. Ish Smith played 24. Do you think that Ish Smith gets that type of run? And do you think Bertans gets another hefty amount of minutes after getting 29 as the most off anyone off the bench?
I think Bertans keeps getting 28 to 30 minutes. He's been closing most of the year either
he's
over.
Played well too.
Yeah, and they need him. They need his shooting out there. He was like the one of the most important pieces on the Spurs last year, and he's been really good for Washington so far. And this year he's been closing over. First it was Bonga, now it's been Brown and or Rui. The part of that last game against the Kings that I don't know if it'll continue, and I really hope it doesn't, is the closing backcourt of Ish Smith plus Isaiah Thomas. That is something that I can't imagine is possibly something that they plan on doing long term. So I would expect that more often than not, one of Troy Brown or Rui Hachimura are in the closing lineup instead of Ish Smith. So I projected Ish for, I think, 20 or 22 minutes instead of 24. I gave Isaiah 28. So I only gave them, I think I gave them 2 minutes playing alongside each other. So that's the one spot that I think is different. But I do expect Bertans to close. I expect Beal and Bryant to close. And then it's just a matter of who the other two are.
Are you willing to get Bertans at his price?
I got 10% on DraftKings.
Okay, that sounds about right at 5,200, right? I mean, I don't know how much more of him you're going to get there, but you get 28, 29 potential minutes from Bertans. That's not the worst thing. It's a tough matchup though. It's not a spot that I love, but you only have 2 games on this slate, so there it is.
Yeah, like if I'm playing one lineup or I'm building 3 max lineups, Bertans isn't getting in there. But if I'm playing 150 lineups where my goal basically is to have large amounts, in this case for me personally, of like Luka, Porzingis, right now it's looking like Hardaway, Harris, and then for other value though to be rotating through guys, then I'm going to get to some Bertans.
Yeti Express DFS says, I don't get the Bertans love. Honestly, it's not like he's cheap.
There is no Bertans love.
What's up?
There is no Bertans love.
Exactly. If you're getting 10% of him, that's not a lot.
I mean, right now he's projected for 15% ownership right now. I have 10. There's no Bertans love. He's just a player.
You're literally under the field.
Yeah, he's a player on a 2-game slate.
For sure. Somebody asked in chat, they said, who will be the no-name scrub that ruins the slate, meaning just blows it up with a big game? If there had to be someone, who would it be?
Jeremy Grant.
You think so?
He's that type of guy that can just wreck Washington. Like, huge pace up spot. Yeah. All you need is for him to play well or for Millsap to get in trouble or something. Can knock down some threes, get some steals. He's just that guy where, like, in the second quarter, he has 24 fantasy points, and you're just like, yeah, I saw that coming.
Yeah, and unlike Dwight Powell, he's a high-energy player that can swoop in and clean a few things up around the basket, too.
Right. Yeah, he's – if you told me he was playing 30 minutes tonight, I would have like 100%. But
at 3,700? Oh, no question.
Right, but I'm saying like I would expect him to produce whatever minutes he's on the floor. So I think he could just be that guy where you really wish you had more.
Man, we just went an hour on a 2-game slate, men of the people, and we only got 173 likes with 2,000 people watching. What do we do wrong, man?
You didn't offer him free stuff.
I guess so. Are we not good enough? Anyway, if you like the show, hit us with a thumbs up. We appreciate it. It helps us keep putting out free content here on YouTube. Stick around. Fast Eddie Fear coming up next with Chris Randone. Adam and I will be back with you tomorrow. The last deeper dive monster slate. You will certainly want to be here for this one. We're going to go through everything. It's going to be a long show, and we're not going to miss a thing on the deeper dive presented by Yahoo Daily Fantasy Sports. Good luck tonight, fellas. We'll see you back here soon.
Tuesday, 2-game slate today. Welcome everybody, ladies and gentlemen, to the Osmo.com live before lock. Chris Randone and the amazing Eddie Fear. Eddie, good afternoon, man. How are you, bud?
I'm great. It's good to see you. When you say good afternoon, are you westerly of me? Are you out on the best coast, the West Coast?
Yeah, I mean, I'm as west as you can get in the U.S. So I'm in San Diego.
You're in the Aleutian Islands at the Hawaii? I think.
Okay. I guess before Hawaii.
I didn't know you were in San Diego. I lived in I worked for Upper Deck and Blizzard for a few years, so I lived out in the OC for some number of years.
How'd you like the OC actually?
It's amazing. It's like 80. Like if you're close enough to the coast, obviously the more you go in, it's not quite that great. But it's like 80 in the summer, 72 in the winter. 12 months a year of golf was exciting at the time. So I mean, the weather is obviously brilliant. Depending where you live, the property can be expensive and whatever. But it's I'd have to struggle to come up with things about living in California I didn't like.
Except the taxes, right?
Yeah, that I guess was a bit. Although I was on people's couches for most of that time. I never knew when I was going home, and I still owned a store out on the East Coast. So I was traveling a lot, so didn't pay any taxes. So, man,
you had an interesting life, Eddie. I got to tell you, with the short amount of time that I've known you, you definitely have some stories and some interesting things that probably a lot of people haven't experienced.
I try to swap careers every 5 years or so, which I'm blessed to be able to do, which makes things. Yeah, that's fun. If you have the means, I strongly recommend it because it's I think it sucks that we're like, kids, you have no idea what's going on. Then all of a sudden your body's getting weird, and then you have to do well in school, and then you get a job, and then you have to do it for 60 years until you play some shuffleboard and die. I think that's a huge waste of a life. So if at all possible, bounce around, do interesting things.
Well, let's go ahead and start giving the people what they're here for. 2-game slate. Not really a lot to talk about for this hour. So, let's make the best of it. Let's get what we can in this hour and try to give them some great things.
I thought maybe it'd be interesting. Again, much like life, let's maybe shake it up a bit, do it a little interesting. Maybe like go down our sort of spoiler our ownership rankings. Maybe like go down the ownership rankings, talk about guys and how we feel about that number. Because that's the only place I can really come in to edges here. There's infinite analysis. There was, I think, both the morning show and of course the deeper dive leading into this. So where many people are 1, if not 2 hours into analysis on these 2-game slates. We can go through the obvious for a third time for many people, or I really think the absent significant injury news on this slate, you're really just sitting on the probable Maxi Kleber. Basically everybody's healthy. That the edge is, just being a little bit over on these guys, a little bit under on these guys.
Well, let's do this. We'll do the ownership, and we'll play around with the boomer bust tool since a lot of people in here don't have access to that. And give them a little bit of a sneak peek. And for those of you who are wondering how to get access to that, we'll do that a little bit later in the show. But I guess first things first, obviously the number one guy, everyone's been talking about him in the shows today. He's coming in number one on the ownership projection, 53.7% currently as of 54 minutes ago. But Luka Doncic, and what's great about Luka, man, is what is there bad to say about him? I think me growing up, LeBron James, favorite player by far. The next, Michael Jordan that we got to see in our generation. But now I'm starting to feel that the battle between this next iconic player, is between him and Giannis. How do you feel about that?
I struggle not to underrate Giannis because of the shooting. And I think he was justifiably the MVP last year, even with Harden's amazing year. And if you look at how good he was, the team with him on the court and off the court, and Harden was carrying a much worse squad for quite a while. And I understood sort of I'll go with the hate for Giannis from a lot of people because he's not good at shooting, and it feels like something your MVP should be able to do. Like, I understood where people were like, you figure, okay, you have to put the biscuit in the basket if you're playing basketball. But I find Luka much more enjoyable to watch. And it is, I don't know, I'm trying to think of a good parable in other sports. Like, Giannis is simply a physical freak. Giannis is a man among boys. Luka's getting there the hard way. And for some reason, I find that. So, like, when you say Luka could be the next Michael Jordan or Luka could be the next LeBron James, and I think LeBron's game is the one, certainly statistically and in a lot of ways on the court, that of all the greats, that Luka reminds me of the most. He's got a really good all-around game for his size and position. He's an excellent rebounder. He comes up with passes that you just don't see from anywhere else. When you talk about Giannis, he's amazing, but that feels weird to me to even put his name in that conversation. Whereas Luka, I'm like, yeah, that could maybe happen. Giannis is sort of, I don't know. We'll go with Shaq. Like, I love Shaq, and I have Shaq is my answer for the most dominant basketball player I've ever seen live. Like, I've seen Michael Jordan play 3 times, twice with the Bulls and once with the Wizards live, and I saw Shaq play, I think, 4 times. Shaq just was an Shaq in the early 2000s was just like playing with my sister's kids or something, just throwing fools around. And that's sort of what Giannis reminds me of. If that's an odd differentiation to make, but it's sort of between greatness and dominance, if that makes any sense. And now that I hear myself say it, it doesn't make a ton. But to bring it around to today and DFS, I want to endorse fading Luka. I want to. I want to talk about the matchup
tonight.
I want to. I'll get there. All right, short version. Too long. I don't mean fade play 0, and I'm not suggesting it, actually. I was going to come around and say I can't. So I can't. I think I'd be over the field. So short version. I think I'd be over the field. If he's going to be in the low 50s owned, I believe I'd have more.
I thought he would be in the maybe 65, 75 range. And so to be at 50% is a little bit weird.
Right. It's we've had a couple slates this year with transcendent on top players like this, and I think most projections are going to throw him out as the highest scoring player by some 15 points or so. I think I had him by about 16, and that's just too low ownership. Like, I can do some really nice things with my lineup when I get away. There's a number of significantly priced players like Kawhi and Beal, who I think have very real upside and I want to get away from it. Just mathematically, that number's too low. I think it actually may end up being a little higher. If we're on like 70, 75% Luka, we're having a very, very real conversation. It doesn't intuitively math out right for me to get away from that man at that price with how good he's been in very difficult matchups in the past. And we can talk all day about the Clippers and their stack of elite defenders. And it is singularly in my many years of watching basketball, an amazing team at switching and covering, and as they play together even more, and George he looks like he's pretty much 100%, but just more acclimated to the environment. And as the rotation tightens, it's going to be for someone who likes defensive basketball a thing to behold, I think. But Luka's just too good. And I mean, you can look at the last game. They just played the Rockets, played the Clippers last, and Harden had 37, 12, and 8. I think were the numbers that came out of that as a reasonable statistical simulacrum, if you will. So I could talk about it for 15 minutes. I think it's fascinating with exactly the way the defense is aligned, although with the aforementioned switching, it's not terribly relevant. But yeah, if I look at Luka and I think you said we had 53%. That's amusing. Someone asked me on Twitter a little while ago, maybe they're watching the show, what do you think Luka will be at? And I originally said 57 to 60, and then I've tinkered with it for a while longer, I'm dropping him to 53. So that's interesting. If that's the number, I would have more. Now it changes a little bit site to site because of the nuances of building with more or less flex spots, and on FanDuel where you sort of have to build the 5 micro lineups balanced against each other, and it just ends up being slightly different based on those ownership percentages. But on DK, where there really aren't any positions and some of the values pretty intriguing for me, and even some of the just underpriced mid-range players, from the Tim Hardaways of the world to the Thomas Bryants in the 5 and the Paul Millsaps, I feel pretty solid that number is still a little bit too low. There's certainly merit to not having 100%. There's certainly merit to an argument of having, like, if you're someone who likes taking risks, I don't have a problem if you build 150 lineups with no Luka tonight. You're going to do extremely well the 10% of the time he disappoints hilariously, and the 25% of the time he has a sub 58-point fantasy game or something like that, pulling all those numbers out of my butt. But you get the idea. Like, you would expose yourself to a massive upside. You can make an argument that tournament structure and size plays into this thing. Like, there's, for a 2-game slate, a massive $400,000. I saw was the largest tournament on FanDuel. That's a crap ton of entries, and there is an argument to be made that if you're trying not to split with 74 other people for first place, the first step to do that would be fading Luka Doncic. But
I will say this. It's interesting that you said that. One, because I'm playing more showdown heavy tonight, and he is 20,000 if you want to put him in the captain spot. And it makes it really difficult to get a very well-balanced lineup with him there. And even when he's not there in the secondary tier, he's still almost 14K. But I went back and peeled some layers to try to justify, could I fade him in showdown? And so I guess we can translate this into the 2-game slate as well, because there's not that much of a difference, because he is fairly priced at a high level on a 2-game slate as well. But he's faced 3 of the top 10 defensive efficiency teams this year so far. And in those 3 games, he hit below value. One against the Nuggets, who by far is one of the best defensive teams in the league.
Orlando and Boston?
Orlando and Boston, correct. So those 3 games, if you want to look at it from, I guess, that perspective, and looking at it with the Clippers are in the top 10 as well. So I can see that. And it's interesting that you mentioned that, because I kept going back and forth trying to figure out, is it worth it to really pay up for Luka, or should I go elsewhere and maybe be able to fit in another star at a lower price point?
Yeah, I would have to it has to do with if Bradley Beal isn't dealing with the Nuggets, which isn't great, and isn't dealing on, by the way, the front end of a back-to-back for him, which I don't think I've seen being mentioned quite enough today. They're on a double roadie, as are the Clippers, by the way, where I've sampled a lot of content today, and no one mentions that. And it's not the beginning and end of the world, but the fact that both of those teams are on back-to-backs front end on the road, especially with how the Clippers can handle back-to-backs, seems something that would merit a bit more discussion. If you want me to go down the road of the reasons I could think of to fade Luka, is they can obviously put a quality defender on him at basically all times. That should factor into your calculus somewhere. He has been shooting a little over his head. When you go back and talk about the games with Boston and Orlando was legit bad. Boston, he scored at least into the mid 50s or something, and you can argue there's no one else tonight is necessarily going to get 50. So it has something to do with the other teams in the other matchups. So like if the secondary options were a little bit better, I would be a little more on board. But again, he's superlatively the best play. But let me pull up like some game.
So let's try to just look at it a little deeper. If you don't go Luka, sure, where could you see yourself going in rostering a lineup?
Yeah, there's a lot to talk about there. So yeah, we'll look at Luka. Last 4 games, 15 of 29 from the field, 11 of 18 from the field, 11 of 18 from the field. So that's 52%, 61. Now, to be fair, the 61s came against Cleveland and Golden State. So that's a couple teams in which you would expect to be able to make a goodly number of your shots. But what's become more of an issue, besides the stabilizing at 35 or 36 minutes, is he does so many other things. His last bad shooting game was against Toronto, which is a very quality defense. He shot 5 for 14, 36% from the field. He had 58 fantasy points. I remember the Boston game, he wasn't that bad. He shot 11 for 21. He had 56 fantasy points. So you need a lot of things to happen. Like I have him projected for nearly 10 higher than that, but you need him to fail fairly spectacularly or have several other players really get there. So when you talk about the other guys, I think Jokic is an interesting place to start. Now, he was disappointing in both his games against Washington last year. I think he played both of them. Yeah, he played both of them. And Thomas Bryant was just fine against him. Like, I'd want to get away from Thomas Bryant because the ways in which he can lose time are obvious. You have, again, that team on the road, back-to-back on the road in Denver, which isn't the most easy place to play, the biggest dog of the night of the 2 dogs by, quite a significant amount. It's like a 10-point line. And they've expressed a lot of interest in giving more time to Mo Wagner, his backup. And we've seen that not that long ago where, last game was great and he's had a couple really exciting games, but he's also had games, 28 minutes last game, 2 before that, 22, 28 the game before that. So, even in close games, we don't know if we're necessarily getting 30 minutes out of him. And if this game goes sideways, which isn't, an impossibility by any means, you have an immediate pivot there. The thing is, he, to my recollection, played really well against Jokic. So let's take a look at some numbers and see if
it's really hard to see the Wizards compete in this game. When I look at the 2 teams, Denver plays. It's a 6.5 point pace down spot for Washington.
Yeah. Oh, Washington is like top 5 in pace, and Denver is last or close to last. They might be like 29th, but it's basically one of the fastest teams in the league versus one of the I think they may be the slowest. I'll look at today's pace ratings. It obviously
and the Nuggets haven't been winning games with their offense. They're one of the least efficient offensive teams this year. I mean, they've been winning with their defense.
Yeah,
and I think Jokic is interesting because he'll crash the boards. I mean, Washington is really bad front court when it comes to rebounding, so I can see that. But I'm just trying to wrap my head around Doncic, or if I pivot, then I get Jokic and I mean maybe George, Kawhi. I mean, these are decisions that I'm trying to figure out so I can make sense.
I mean, my first inclination would be to be able to largely avoid value that doesn't feel great to get, a couple other nuggets. Like I would be Montrezl Harrell's one of my favorite plays on the slate. I think we currently have him projected to be. If I was to list the players on the slate and we went through the ownership thing I discussed, I suspect the player of whom I would be more exposed relative to what we have projected for ownership than anyone else in the field right now would be Montrezl Harrell. I think we had him in the mid-20s when I looked. I'd probably be
20.9%. And then on the boom bust tool, he's top 10 at 11.3% boom. However, though, a 51.5% bust.
Okay. I would, without having looked at the tool extensively and being able to, all things are relative, so I'd have to look at what other players' ratings are to know how I feel about that.
I love that call, though. I'm with you on that.
It's a really strong matchup, and having watched their usage and the way that team runs against Dallas, they played in the preseason, but most players were out, and there was obviously no Paul George, and things were different. But in games last year, I remember he had a fair bit of trouble. This is Montrez with DeAndre Jordan. DeAndre Jordan was actually a bit of an issue down there. And when they got him out of there and he was playing more of the Dwight Powells of the world, he was very, very good. I'll pull up. That's just
Yeah, I've really liked the
memory,
second unit.
but yeah, games last year. I mean, he had a pretty decent game there, but if the second to last game last year, where there was where he saw 26 or 31 minutes against DeAndre Jordan, he had 11 points and 8 rebounds. The one game he played the most against Dwight Powell in his 29 minutes, he had 32, 5, and 5. So there's the statistical backup, but that's not super surprising. But they don't have anyone down low who I'm particularly worried about getting up in his grill. And at 6,700 is just a guy who carries a really significant. I get 50 or whatever the last game. I mean, on the last show I did, my two favorite players were Montrezl Harrell and Rashawn Holmes, both priced, at 6.5. And they both hit those ceiling games in very similar spots, including, by the way, Rashawn was getting Washington down low for what it's worth. But yeah, Montrezl had 60 in his last game. Sorry. So this is a guy in a matchup I like just about as much as any on this 2-game slate. He's only $6,700, and we have him projected at 21% ownership. I think you just said 20.9, and
yeah.
He had 60 in his last game. I don't want a game log chase. He had 55 3 games before that. So I don't.
It's a good matchup for him. I mean, Powell and Kleber, I don't think either one of them can handle his athleticism and his aggressiveness down low. So
yeah, they cannot, or Kristaps or Boban or whomever they happen to have out at center. Like none of those matchups are ones that we're. And Montrez is a guy who is somewhat predictable when it comes to one-on-one matchups. There are looking at DVP or PVP as in player versus player is an incredibly bad idea for 60, 70, 80% of the players in the league and 90% of people who don't play down low. But there are a few times it can be really instructive. And one of those guys is Montrez, who on the list of, there's like 8 guys I'm known as the blank whisperer. I'm the Corey Joseph whisperer this year because there was one super chalk Corey Joseph day when I hated him, and then there was one day he was 4%. I really liked him, and he went off and got like 40 or something. So on that list, I've been called the Montrezl Harrell whisperer because he's pretty predictable. There are matchups in which he does really well, and they're not incredibly difficult to see coming. Now, this is a team in flux, so I'm not all over it. I'm not like 100% Montrezl Harrell, but I'd be at least double 21%, which is apparently what we said. That's we have him at half the ownership of Thomas Bryant for $900 more. I have Montrezl Harrell projected for 9.5 more fantasy points. So I'll take it. Like if they were the same ownership, I would like Montrezl Harrell more at half the ownership. I would probably kind of invert those. It's hard not to like Thomas Bryant. Thomas Bryant played very well against Jokic. I'm looking at my notes from a game last year. Let me see if I have any sort of.
While we're on the topic, we mentioned 2 guys, Powell and Kleber, who are value plays that people are considering tonight in this 2-game slate. What's your take on these 2, and how do you feel about them?
I would probably be more inclined to play Powell. He has been, as everyone's first reaction to that statement would probably be, warm puke. Like he has been just dreadful. His ability to score half a fantasy point a minute while playing center is really,
it makes no sense.
Really difficult to do. Like you're at sub Biombo, sub Joe Prisbilla, it is really hard to play center in the NBA and score that few fantasy points. It's incredibly difficult.
I think Luke Longley averaged better than that.
Yeah, he did. He did. Size 21s, whatever. He was a big boy. He got to witness up close some very nice basketball games. But yeah, I do not think that necessarily continues. We still have Kleber projected for more. It's $300 more. He's been much better. I have Kleber projected for more raw points. I would be more inclined to come up with the $300 if I could and play Dwight Powell. Which
where else can we go in this game? Because
something that feels inherently wrong. It's always relative to the number of right options that are out there. So if you're running Paul George and Kawhi Leonard next to each other on an 11-game slate, well, there's a whole lot of other guys that can slot in there to take one of those 2 spots. So the likelihood is you need to get a total of, again, pulling a number out of my butt, 125 points out of the 2 of them for it to work out. On tonight's slate, you only need a couple guys to underperform, And all of a sudden that works out just fine. Even if you got 55 out of Kawhi and 45 out of Paul George, that could slot in just fine. So I have Paul George just a hair behind Kawhi Leonard as far as like a points per dollar play, just a very slight hair. And going with ownership and everything, I would probably be a little more inclined if I'm playing one of those guys, which I would think you would end up doing in some 30-40% of your lineups. I'd be slightly more inclined to have Kawhi, all else being equal, if it doesn't force you to make other changes in your lineup. Another guy, looking at this now that I want to bring some attention to is I would rather play Jordan McRae to Troy Brown. And people have asked me about the value a little bit. We have Jordan McRae projected about half of Troy Brown for $100 more, in fairness, on DK and different positions on FanDuel, where I think Troy Brown is the minimum there, and Jordan McRae is 37. So again, maybe that $100 or $200 does something for you. Although also this is a great environment to leave some money on the table. So feel free to not spend it all. But yeah, Jordan McRae is on a string of perfectly usable fantasy games. They like him. I think there's a reasonable chance of a blowout. I mentioned again, they're on a road back-to-back, which if you researched it out would portend a slight increase in minutes for him for various reasons. He is backing up some number of people right now. And, he's cheap. And at that ownership on a slate this small, I thought he was going to be, I don't know, 20% owned. We have him at 7. Now, I will suspect that comes up. I'll go ahead and put that number closer to 11 or 12. But his last 4 games in DK points are 23, 15, 25, and 23. The matchup is obviously not ideal, but it's a 2-game slate. So, you got to bend somewhere. So at that 36 and 37, I think is the FanDuel price. I would certainly have more than that on Jordan McRae. He's a guy who's not afraid to shoot. And I think there's a very reasonable chance. He's at 19 to 24 minutes, 3 of his last 4 games. And he will be out there in a blowout, which can't be said about several other players on this team. They ran some really interesting lineups in the last game where they went super small, and you had like McRae and Ish and Isaiah. Like, they've been doing some really interesting things when you break down their lineups. So I won't waste time talking about all of these lineups because I really don't know, the odds of a blowout and what necessarily would be employed. But there's a real chance he would play in the blowout. Other players, not so sure. Troy Brown, for example, I want to get this right. Their last 2 real blowouts, they've had a couple like 10-point games, but they got whooped solidly by the Timberwolves. I want to say twice on both ends of that back-to-back. They had a home and home like a week apart, but they played both sides. But I think the Timberwolves won by 20, and the Wizards won by 20. And in both of them, McRae was out there and played in the blowout and got the extra minutes. And in only one of them did Troy Brown, and was actually not in the one I expected. And the other one, I think Justin Robinson had his spawn, and you have issues with maybe that ends up being Isaac Bonga. So like McRae will play regardless. I like Troy Brown just fine too. His price is, I think, 3,500 both sites. There's any number of ways he gets back up to playing 25, 28 minutes. That could certainly happen. But I kind of like the Washington backups, and McRae probably my favorite of those.
My favorite is Mortis Wagner. I think at 4,500, I don't mind it. His usage is up. It's pretty high, and I mean, for him, the point per dollar, it's pretty much there. 7% projected ownership, and something that I think benefits him tonight is they play big. I mean, you got Jokic, Millsap, and Plumlee. All these guys. I mean, and then also if it is a blowout, he will get extended run as well. So I don't mind him at 4,500. I don't mind McRae either. These guys, it's a very difficult matchup for the Wizards tonight. And Nuggets Nuggets backcourt, their guards are really good defensively. So I don't know how to really write this game script, but I really like the call on the Washington Wizards backups.
Yeah, I mean, and I think Wagner would definitely be my second favorite there. And he's, just like McRae, you see very similar minutes, very similar production, even a little more out of Wagner a couple times. And both of them are going to those seem to be the places I want to immediately go here. And their ownership is just not high enough. Now it's understandable to not target teams in dreadfully bad positions. My concern there is I have a tweet from a couple minutes ago that said, is it more, hold on, I'll find it. Isn't it a great spot for Bryant? They'll need his size tonight more than Wagner against Jokic. They're the same size, I think. Someone can look that up for me, but those men are both 6'10", 6'11", 240 pounds, 245 pounds. Like, they're identically sized. So size has very little to do with it. I will say, I pulled it before, the Jokic-Bryant games last year, Bryant was really good, and they let him play a lot. They played the Nuggets 2 times last year. Thomas Bryant played 35 and a half and 40 minutes in those 2 games and had 22 and 8 and 20 and 14 with 3 assists and 3 blocks in those 2 games.
Wagner, 6'11", Bryant, 6'10", Wagner, 245 pounds, Bryant, 248. So about the same.
I mean, they're basically the same dude. Yeah. So no, it isn't going to be doesn't have much to do with that. It has to do with Bryant, if he plays well, could get a ton of time. Now, you may catch some foul trouble. Jokic, not supreme at drawing fouls, not overly aggressive, but there's foul trouble outs, there's blowout outs. So a guy like $4,500 Mo Wagner just fine. But it has been a spot in which Bryant was really good. And he held Jokic reasonably in check. Jokic in those 2 games last year, 15, 11, and 6 with no other stats, which is not great for his price and being Nikola Jokic. And against the Wizards center, who are normally a sieve. And 23, 14, and 4 with 2 steals and a block, which is 52, 53 fantasy points, which is just fine. And again, 2-game sample, I don't really give a crap, but just, my eye test was that Bryant looked comfortable, and clearly Brooks agreed, as he got more minutes in those 2 games than he was getting at that time of year, pretty significantly. So that's why it's hard for me. Like, normally I would really want to get away from Bryant just based on superlative ownership and obvious ways that it could not work out. Like fading bad chalk has kind of been my thing this year. But that's numbers about where it should be. 5,800 is too cheap. There is a real ceiling to be achieved. It's not a spot in which I'm super worried about his individual ability to hold his time on the floor, nor where I think he necessarily gets in a ton of foul trouble. So 40%
is Bertan's 5,200 price tag creeping up a little too high now?
In a vacuum, I would say yes. Now, the number of pivots in the area and position aren't brilliant. He's shown he can have a very real upside. There's obviously not a lot of confidence in Brown now. I think the back-to-back actually favors a little better for him on the end of that minute split. So I don't love it. It would be an ownership thing for me, but I presume we have him, somewhere in the, well, let's see how high we have him. That's sort of why I wanted to do this, because all these guys are, there's plenty of players at 20% I really like, and at 30% I would kind of dislike.
Bertans is at 15% right now.
Yeah, I was gonna say 10% Bertans I'd want more, 20 I'd want less. So that's kind of dwarf. Is it a little high? Yes. And in a bad matchup, you're kind of sort of starting to fix out the upside. But 2-game slate, 5,200 isn't all that much. I think Bertans Tim Hardaway Jr. is an interesting question, because the sort of, so Dallas ran a really weirdly unique rotation in their last game, which was, besides getting Hardaway out there starting alongside Kristaps Luka, it was Powell, Finney-Smith, I think. Right? They didn't start either of the point guards. Yeah, that was it. They didn't start either of the point guards. D-Lon got the backup time, and Jalen Brunson played like 3 minutes or something. I really went back and I tried to Carlisle a bit today and figure out how much of this was a reaction to Harden and the weaknesses in the current Rockets defense, and try to think if this repeats. So I am, and I'm curious if we have news, by the way, because we are approaching games.
Question in the chat. Wanted to hear your thoughts on the other side of the ball for Denver and point guard Jamal Murray.
Yeah, he seems appropriately priced and owned. Obviously, he has shown he has real ceilings and floors. There's super frenetic output there. I do find it hard to believe that this isn't a matchup where you get something pretty sexy out of Murray, Barton, or Jokic. It's difficult to imagine that on a 2-game slate in about their best possible matchup, or top 3 by my estimation in any case, that they would not find a way for one of those few guys. I mean, I guess that, really needs to be stated that it is a brilliant spot for Denver and a very not brilliant spot for Washington. And quantifying that position by position is obviously helpful there. At their prices, where you have 9,800 on Jokic, and I think it's 6,000, 6,100 on Barton, and 74 I think is the number on Jamal Murray, I probably prefer Murray the most. But last I checked, he was owned somewhere in the 30s. Right, he's at 37 right now. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's in a row, but 37. That's about where the number should be to me. So I think it's just fine. I'm a big fan of getting one of those nuggets in there at least. Like if I looked at a lineup and it had none of them, if I was building a lineup and had none of those 3 players, I would question my lineup building decisions. I can see many ways it works out, but Murray, the individual matchup I feel best with, and the usage I feel best with, and just versus price, I would probably have the most of Murray, and he's the player I like most of those 3. So it'd be my most exposed nugget, which is just about my favorite team. Millsap is an interesting question. He's performed a little bit over his head recently, I think is reasonable to say, but I'm a long time Paul Millsap fan, and this certainly a Washington team that gives it up very sweet. They're not on a back-to-back, so a little less likely that you get the Jeremy Grant pivot. I'm a fan of getting some Jeremy Grant in your lineups. He's again going to be a little underowned for not that many crazy things have to happen for him to outscore a $3,700 price tag. So I will see if his updated ownership moved him out of. We have him at 10% right now. That's about right. I would probably want like 13 or 14. Feels a little bit better to me. I think that's a little bit low for how good the matchup is and how easy it is for him to get time. But slightly prefer Grant to Mason Plumlee, just sort of as an ownership idea, but roughly the same odds that things turns out extremely well for them. Plumlee is $100 more and about 4% more owned. Obviously, Plumlee doesn't correlate great with Jokic. You can still do it because Plumlee can be that effective in his 18 minutes. Even if Jokic plays 30, they can both get where they need to get. Little less excited about playing both of them with regards to Millsap and Grant. But if I put one of those guys in a lineup, I would run Jeremy Grant a little before I ran Mason Plumlee.
What about 2 guys on going back to the first game we didn't really touch on, but do have a significant role in the rotation on the Dallas side? Tim Hardaway Jr. at 5,000 and Finney Smith at 4,400. Tim Hardaway now has seen kind of a change, being in the starting lineup and now being a part of more of a role, I guess you could say, in the offense. 5,000 is kind of cheap for kind of the amount of time he'll be on the court.
Well, I don't know how much time he's going to be on the court. If he sees 35 minutes, yeah, I'm a huge fan of 5,000. He played against Houston, and again, that's why I brought it up. Is if he starts, I think it is reasonable to think that he gets really significant time again. And I don't think we had seen. I'm checking and making sure I hadn't missed it. But if we have a Dallas starting lineup and he's in it, I'm a big fan. And
well, they kind of already announced it.
There's a Dallas starting lineup and he's in it. Okay.
Yeah, they mentioned that Seth Curry now is going to be taking a back seat to a reserve role. Yep. So at 5,000, it's kind of intriguing.
Yeah, it actually came out just a minute ago. So the lineup is out, and it's exactly the same lineup as last time with him basically starting at the 2. Luka is the point guard, very Braun-like again when that happens. Which should make you like Luka a little bit more. It's just another bit of security on the downside there. But they are running that exact same starting lineup. A bigger fan of Hardaway at 5,000 than Dorian Finney-Smith at 44. Again, 2-game slate. Don't misunderstand me. But especially in this particular matchup, I'll be surprised if Finney-Smith is as effective as he was in that last game, but it's a good reason to hope that they run as dense of a lineup as they did last game. they ran out 9 or 10 players, but you had only I remember that Jalen Brunson only played a couple minutes in the first half. So they ran a much denser lineup than we are used to seeing. Obviously, JJ Barea has been largely expurgated in his entirety from that lineup. But let me see if I have
the last two game flows for them. They kind of just ran those 8-man rotations. But when you really look deeper into it, I mean, only 5 or 6 guys are playing heavy minutes. Outside, Jalen Brunson came in for a couple minutes, and then the other game was a blowout where no one played after the third quarter. But I mean, when it comes to, I guess, when you're looking at Hardaway and Smith, they're on the court quite a bit these last 2 games. So yeah. Seth Curry's definitely taken a huge back seat to this offense.
Yeah, I mean, as an ownership play, I'm a pretty big fan of Hardaway because he's just not owned quite as much as he should be. Our most recent projection has him at 18. Let me make sure this hasn't got done. That feels a little light for a solid value piece who I think now there's at least a strong chance ends up playing somewhere in the range of 35 minutes. That's hard to get. Now we have him at 15 and a half. He actually dropped down a little bit. I will say that Tim Hardaway Jr.'s value is more so than many players inversely proportional to how much the other defense screws up. And this isn't a defense that's going to screw up a lot. So I'm not super excited. I haven't projected for 24 and a half fantasy points in 33 minutes, I think, last I looked at it. I do think this is a spot in where I'm a big fan of Luka and Kristaps because they're going to have to do a little more individual work. It doesn't strike me as a spot where I'd expect to see Tim Hardaway get enough open looks to smash that price. But it's a 2-game slate, and even if he doesn't have to massively overperform a projection of 24 or 25, he gives you 29. That quite possibly is going to work out just fine for you. So I would have more than 15-16% Tim Hardaway Jr. Dorian Finney-Smith, I suspect we have in like the high single digits. We have him actually even higher. We have him at 19%. I would rather spend the number on him, on Hardaway, than on Dorian Finney-Smith, with Finney-Smith all the way out at the 3 and liking Powell a little bit more. I'd probably rather play Powell than Finney-Smith for $400 less. But again, just absolutely fine to play. But, you have to come under on some guys. Guys I would have less of than the field would probably be, I'd be over on Luka. It's hard to avoid Gary Harris. We have his project as the number 2 guy. I expect him to be out there. The way Washington makes this a game is somehow either through direct scoring or just occupying the defense extensively, is Bradley Beal having a huge game. And Gary Harris has done an excellent job on him in the past. That's an individual matchup I'll pull up some numbers on.
It's hard to see Gary Harris though, just production wise for fantasy purposes. I would probably trust him on the defensive side getting more points than the offensive side.
Yeah, he's that's a perfect. So yeah, but you look at again the same 2 games last year. We're talking about Jokic and Bryant in those games. Bradley Beal in 36 minutes. And both these games are post John Wall. These games both occurred in March. Bradley Beal, 36 minutes, 17 points, 6 assists, 3 rebounds, 3 steals. That's not going to get it done. Gary Harris in that game, 9 points, 2 rebounds, 2 steals. End list in 34 minutes. The other game, Beal, 25, 2 rebounds, 8 and 3. That's not going to get it done at that price. And Gary Harris, 15, 5, 1 and 2. So, yeah. But this is an even worse Washington defensive team. I really like Gary Harris at $4,200. Like, there's not much risk there outside of a potential blowout, and that is not a big exposure. And that he can smash 4,200. He's not a guy who frequently smashes, but it's not hard for him to get to 30. And again, I haven't projected raw points. I think within 1 of Tim Hardaway Jr. He's $800 less. Again, we have him at 49%, so anywhere in that range is just fine for me.
Someone asked in chat, will Kawhi Leonard defend Luka majority of the time?
I think it's more likely. I mean, a lot of guys are going to defend Luka. This team switches so no, not the majority of the time. 0 chance. There's no chance 50% of the time Luka's on the court that he's guarded by Kawhi Leonard. Impossible. Will not occur. Just Gotcha. Let you know that right there. Will he be the Clipper who is in close proximity to him the most? No, he might get up to second, but he might be as low as third is the number of guys they get on there. Just because of minutes reasons, and with the fact that you're going to get whatever 32, 4, 6 minutes out of Pat Beverly, Kawhi, and Paul George. They are the guys he will see the most of, because after that, it's a lot of guys who play 17 to 25 minutes, from the Mo Harkless, Rodney McGruder, Michael Green, et cetera, guys who get out there for less. So those are the three guys he will see the most of due to all the switching that will occur. If I had to guess, Kawhi would actually be the third of those three. They'll probably see barely the most of Paul George, and then they'll see. But if he's out there for, of his 100% of possessions in his 36 minutes, it's probably going to be, 28 of them. And I'll look it up later. And if you want, send me a tweet, and they have this exact, you can look this up on NBA.com. They keep track of all this, but you'll get something like, 28% of the time Paul George, 24% of the time Pat Beverly, 21% of the time Kawhi Leonard, etc. Dudes. I could give you a better guess if I looked at the rotations, but no, Kawhi will probably be third. Not that there is a great deal of disparity between those three men. All three of those guys are very good on that end of the court. So, and they're good in different ways, but whether or not it's majority Kawhi isn't terribly relevant, because all three of those guys are exceptional. And there's no reason to think that really particularly matters with Luka's ability to score fantasy points. He has made lots of very good defenders look really stupid this year.
What's your take on Boban? Because a lot of people are starting to mention his name in the chat, so we might as well talk about him.
I don't think he plays.
Yeah.
I would give a bet right now. I'd give 3-1 he doesn't step on the court. You need blowout or something a little weird to happen. I would be surprised if he played. And I love me some Boban. I'm gonna order that shirt, but bit too cute for me tonight.
All right, I guess if you want, go over your top plays real quick, because I'm putting some lineups right now. So,
okay.
If you want to just, break down maybe your top 5 plays for the night, and then we could just answer some final questions to end out this.
Okay. I'm gonna talk about guys versus ownership. So Luka, 54%. I'm gonna refresh once more, make sure I haven't missed anything. And I'm gonna just talk about how I would probably relate to ownership. And I always want to make sure I'm not over ownership on 8 guys and under on 2, because that's not possible. Luka, we have 54%. I would have more. There are plenty of good things about the matchup, plenty of bad things about the matchup. Both games about the same pace. The game projected to remain closer between the two, so less likely of a blowout. But again, plenty of elite defenders on the other side. I don't want to go through the whole spiel again. But just as the guy who's likely to score the most fantasy points, 54 is too low. And again, I like fading chalk. I would have to have more than that. I suspect I would be closer to 65, 70% Luka. He's that good. Sorry. Gary Harris, 48. I'd have less. I like him just fine. I'd have less than that. Paul Millsap, 47. I'd have less. I like him just fine. I'd have less than that. Kristaps, 44. I'd have less. So I guess I have plenty of guys I'd have less on. So the next 3 guys I would have less. None significantly. Probably I would be the most under on those guys of probably Kristaps, because I'm wagering on Luka if I'm going over there. We have combined 98% or so ownership on the 2 main guys on the Mavs there. So most people will go one or the other. I do think that's a slightly ideal way to go. Although I would rather have Luka and Kristaps than Kawhi and Paul George, oddly enough. I just think it is more likely on that team that they dominate minutes and usage. You can come away with games where those 2 guys have 81% of the usage, like that's happened several times this year. This could really be that spot where just nobody else can operate. Hopefully no emergency up there. Thomas Bryant, I would have less because of, again, liking Montrez so much. And again, some number of ways I can see that not necessarily working out. Kawhi, we have at 42%. I would have a little less of that. Jamal Murray, we have 40%. That's about the right number. Jokic, we have 37. I imagine I would have about that. That's about the right number. Barton, we have 36. I'd have a little less than that. I never quite get there on Barton, but it's a great spot. And again, I'm trying to have at least one of Murray, Jokic, and Barton in every lineup. So there'd be the occasional doubles. So all those guys being 35 to 40% maths out about the right way. Lou Williams, 36%. I probably come in on the under there. Again, I'm just double checking, making sure we haven't seen anything. Clippers starting who we expected them to with Mo Harkless filling in there alongside Beverly, Leonard, George, and Zubac. Zubac fine for me. Again, I'm a huge fan of Harrell tonight, so obviously there's a real negative correlation between those two guys. So I would just play a lot of Harrell. I wouldn't get to a lot of Zubac for that reason, but I don't have an issue with anyone getting 4K Zubac in their life. He has a couple big games once a year, but it's more frequently spots where I worry about Harrell's ability to operate and perform, and obviously that's not the case here for me. Kleber, we have a 28%. I would have less than that. Powell, we have at 25%. I probably have about that, maybe a little more. Beal, 25%. I really want to say, this is I like going over on Beal. He has been under-owned most of the year, and obviously had some savaging performances when he is incredibly low-owned. But it is a spot I expect him to have enough difficulty, and the price is just still high enough where, if he's sitting at, the beginning of the year, he was in the 7s, or he's still sitting in the 8s, he's up to even 9,300 on DK. That significant tag and 25% still being legit ownership feels about right. Isaiah Thomas is about where he should be. Montrezl Harrell, again, is the player I think I would be highest on relative to the field. We have him at 17%. I would be easily double that. Torrey Brown, 16. It's about right. Tim Hardaway, 16. That's about right. Rui Hachimura, 15. I would come in under that. I do think the minutes issues are legitimate and will continue onward. There have been some real holes in his game. It's a pretty terrible matchup. I'm not a big fan of Rui Hachimura in this spot, so I'd be around half that. I'd have 7, 8, 10%, not that much. Plumlee at 14 feels right. Zubac at 13 feels right. Bertans at 13 feels right. JaMychal, only $3,400. That's fine. Monty Morris, 11%. So I haven't specifically said this. If you're going to project a game for a blowout, a 2-game slate is the best time to do it. So certainly in my first probably 3 lineups, I would build a lineup that focuses heavily on the Dallas and LA game and has certainly Jordan McRae and Monty Morris and Jeremy Grant and Mason Plumlee in it. That's a fun lineup for me, and that's your value. And then you are running just the monsters from the other game where you run, Luka, Paul George, Montrez, etc. And Monty Morris finds his way into that lineup. Obviously, significant negative correlation with Jamal Murray, but again, at those prices in an insane matchup, I wouldn't set the rule against it. Delon Wright at 10%, that feels about the right number. That could certainly work out. Jeremy Grant in the same range. And again, Jordan McRae is now down to 5%. I would have triple that probably. Just has produced any number of ways he gets more than 20 minutes. Almost certainly will get, in that 15 to 20 minute range. And, even in some difficult matchups has produced. And cheap 2-game slate. That number seems too small for me. So there's guys and matchups. And how are your lineups looking?
Mine?
Yeah, yours.
I'm right now. You have me on this this contemplation of Luka Doncic. I'm still trying to figure it out with 5 minutes to go. Just trying to see if I'm playing higher stakes. So I mean, this is a little bit more of a different take.
And we'll take a look at the ownership in 4 minutes. I feel confident in saying, if you trust our ownership rankings, that number is too low. I looked at, because it's obviously the big, spot on the slate. And we'll never know, by the way, because we get to see it one time, and you'd need to see it a couple hundred times till you had a significant sample size. So no matter what happens, I've gotten a lot of that recently where people are like, "You're great because you go on a hot streak." I'm like, "I'm lucky. You might also be great, but based on a week of crap working out for you means absolutely nothing. You could throw a dartboard, and once in a while you're going to hit 6-7 good shows in a row." But yeah, Luka is just too much, and Powell and his 3 shots a game, and Dorian Finney-Smith, who occasionally will get the double-digit shots, but usually going to take only 6 shots for you. So Luka is just going to score and assist and do infinite things. There's obviously any number of universes in which he gets shut down by any number of excellent defenders on the Clippers, but I'm a believer, and it's just there's enough fun value to cycle through that. I would have more than that, and I feel pretty confident in saying you should. I've heard people say 100%. I'm sure that's not right. It's absolutely fine to do, and most nights it's not going to kill you. It's going to be rare that you're like, "Oh crap, he had 44, I'm just dead." That's only going to happen 15% of the time, something like that. Most of the time you'll be fine. Some nights he'll get 70 and you'll be like, "See?" But I wish I could give you a more nuanced take. If you had a complaint against Luka, it's that a little bit of his performance has been strongly correlated with good matchups this year. If you look at his fantasy points per game, he has been getting more regularly into the 70s in his cherry matchups. Just clicking on his DraftKings log real quick, the games this month in which he exceeded 70 fantasy points were against Houston and Golden State and San Antonio and the Knicks twice. Those are all crappy defenses, and as you mentioned, had a real struggle a few weeks ago against Orlando with a very rare sub 50 game for him, and much more pedestrian 58 against Toronto, which is obviously also a very good defense, 56 against Boston, in which I have him projected at about 64 and change tonight. That's still a just fine number, but he's appropriately priced now. But you have to wonder on a 2-game slate if he's likely to be, or has the greatest odds of being, the highest scoring player on the slate, how often you want to get away. 53% ownership is too low. I suspect the median point is somewhere around 65 or 70% would be the right ownership for him.
I think high stakes he'll be much higher. That would be my... That has
tended to be the case. High stakes, especially on shorter slates, tends to divert itself into more stars and scrubs. Chalky value is what I've seen more often than not over the years. So yeah, I suspect on high stakes it is going to be a higher number. Like if you're inclined to get away from it, go ahead. It's not a grotesque decision, especially at higher stakes. You'll immediately differentiate. You are setting yourself up for a much more divergent series of results in your games.
So
it's much more likely if you fade him, it's much more likely you'll do extremely well or extremely badly.
So we're coming to an end here. We got 30 seconds. So I guess we can kind of break it down. But in my higher stakes, I did go with the fade. You sold me on it.
That's bizarre. I said I'd be over the field, and I sold you on a fade. But okay.
Well, yeah. I mean, I wanted to switch it up because I did want to differentiate myself just somewhat. But
that'll do it.
I went with Jokic, George, Murray, Harrell, Wagner, Hardaway, McRae, Beverly.
Okay.
So that's what I went with.
I have no issue with lineups. We should be close to lock some number of seconds out. So it's I'm happy we managed to stay somewhat on topic. It's a really difficult show just because there's only so much to be said, especially when you're coming in with a couple hours in front of you. But I don't like to invent hot takes for the purposes of good TV. So
no.
I guess my hottest take is I'd have more Jordan McRae and Montrezl Harrell. But I can certainly see getting away from it. I mean,
I like the McRae call.
What's interesting is you're making sort of an implicit bet on other guys.
Yeah.
Like when you say I'm not playing Luka, there's, if Luka's bad game to good game range here tonight is like 50 to 70. So, okay, let's assume that comes in on the low end and you get 53 out of Luka. you're kind of saying more. I like Montrezl Harrell and Nikola Jokic and Jamal Murray, and like you're saying, I think those guys have superlative games, and certainly for the Denver games, if the Denver guys, if that game manages to stay close, it's an environment in which you would expect them to be able to perform. So I don't think it is crazy to be under Luka. And let us take a look at what that.
Someone said that McRae's new grades are EE. They just got updated.
I'm assuming he's referring to Osmos and not mine.
I'm not sure.
Well, I'm sure mine aren't that.
Well, I'm just trying to see, was there some news that would have influenced that or changed that, but I'm not seeing anything. So,
I didn't have any alerts go off, and we had lineups and stuff. So, and
it's just something I'm going to roll with. I mean, whatever happens, happens.
And I was searching TweetDeck. So let me double check, make sure, and then we'll talk about some ownership for a second and see what we got right, what we got wrong, all those goodies. So yeah, there was a 400K on FanDuel. I do have an entry I can look at. Let's click on that real quick. And things. Luka Doncic, 62% at his 12.5 price tag on FanDuel in the largest contest. On DraftKings, what did they have? They also had a 400K. All right, there you go. Luka Doncic, 63%. So, juicy. That's very close to where it should be. It would be difficult for me to break this down, and I'm not sure I'd even be able to put it in words very functionally. But again, for every player, there is a point in his situation that's a little easier to pinpoint. On a short slate where this is how much this guy should be owned, that's getting towards it. The point at which, he is, I'd be like, I think you should fade him. Again, intuitively earlier in the show, I think I said 70. That's about the number where I would have been like, so, with that number at 63, that's at least close. So if you played him, I still slightly prefer that play. If you faded him, I don't think long-term that is necessarily that grotesque. Tim Hardaway got all the way up to 33. I would have wanted less than that. Montrezl Harrell got up to 28. I still would have wanted more than that, but thanks for watching the show, everybody. Let's see. White, Powell at 11s. That's one. I'm just kidding. On a slate like this, how many people are in here right now? 1,500?
Yeah, 1995.
Wow. Okay, so we were over 2,000 for all. So we are, we're moving at a percentage or two, but not that much. So here's our actual ownerships. We have Luka Doncic at 63. Again, that's fine. I would want nominally more. Kristaps Porzingis 57. I would want significantly less.
He's 70% in higher stakes.
Yeah, and he's $1,600. He mats out extremely well. That's just a really big number. And if I'm going over on Luka, I think that would correlate more often now with that going number. And again, he runs even more so into solid defenders most of the game. And there's absolutely, you have to project him for 40 fantasy points and at $6,900. That feels just lovely. So I'm fine with any amount you would have. I would come in under 57% with some of the other pivots. And again, he's priced in position so close to Montrezl Harrell. That would be, I would have to pull from Porzingis and Bryant to funnel my love for Harrell. Paul George at 44, I'd have slightly less. Kawhi's at 30, I'd have slightly more. So I would have pulled the middle on both those. Lou Williams, 35. Yeah, at 6,300, that's about where that's going to land most days. Again, Tim Hardaway Jr. got up to 33. That's now a bit much for me, just based on matchup and the way I expect that defense to go. And additionally, the fact that I can't be sure those minutes are for real. Again, he played whatever it was, 37 minutes in the last game. The 4 games before that, he played 15 to 26 or whatever. So I hope it sticks if you're part of that 33%. But for that reason, yeah, again, I like to fade me some chalk. That's a little too high. Harrell at 28 is, again, I feel well too low. Beverly 23, that's fine. Finney-Smith 16. Kleber 13. Okay. So we ended up with Kleber 13, Powell 11. Yeah, that's reasonable. I'd have a little more Powell and about that Kleber. JaMychal Green 13. I'd have less. It's JaMychal Green. No, it's not as much as when it was 50% JaMychal Green Day and I was Green Day when it was JaMychal Green Day and I was climbing a tree going, have you people ever? And which sucked because I was on with Chris Baggs, who is a big JaMychal Green fan. And there keep being slates he's on where he's kind of chalky. He's like, I really like him. And every time I'm like, it's JaMychal Green. He's not right to ever be owned at 57% or whatever. And he keeps crapping it out that day. So I feel bad for him. He's a functional guy who's just fine at 13%. It's just one of those guys I like Corey Joseph.
Someone in the chat said, Bol is chalk. Let's talk about Bol.
Bol is chalk. Bol is not active. Actually.
I know they're just playing around. They're trying to lighten up the atmosphere here.
You and I were surprisingly on topic talking about basketball the whole show. There were no underwater sound waves, healing childhood memories or any of that.
No. We'll have that. We'll have those times. I'm sure. We still got a long season ahead.
Jerome Robinson 0.2%. I'd want more than that. I'll go with that. Like I have him for like 12 minutes or something. I'd have a percent bare minimum priced Jerome Robinson, hope for a blowout. I'd have more than 1/5%. I'd have like double that. Justin Jackson 1%, Rodney Magruder 1.23, Seth Curry 2.4, Boban Marjanovic 2.5, Mo Harkless 4.2, Delon. Yeah, just one of those spots where there isn't a ton of an edge. You try to pick guys you like a little more and react to things, but I would have. I'm excited about tomorrow's show. I think it's 13 games, so I'm probably going to roll right into research now after I figure out what the hell my daughter is blowing up my phone about.
All right. Well, I guess this is what we'll do. You call your daughter. You guys, everyone in here, thank you for joining us on this Live Before Lock Tuesday night. We appreciate you guys. Good luck tonight. Hopefully someone takes something down, if not all of you. Eddie Fear, thank you once again. Any last words before we go ahead and get out of here?
Looking forward to tomorrow. Thanks, everyone, for making us a little part of your life, and be excellent to each other.
Yes, guys, we do appreciate that. Once again, awesemo.com/NBA. If you're looking to get 50% off your first month, use the promo code LiveBeforeLock. Until tomorrow, guys, everyone take care.